this session we're going to take a look at Revelation chapter 5, where we're introduced to the scroll and the Lamb. Starting at verse 1. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. What we see here is that when John sees the sealed scroll and its opening, he sees the time of fulfillment of Daniel's sealed book. The scroll in Revelation 5 is believed to be the sealed scroll mentioned in Daniel chapter 12. Daniel, as we know, had several visions, and his final vision is recorded in Daniel chapters 10 to 12. Daniel, writing 500 years before John, was told in Daniel 10 verse 14 that this vision he was being shown would not be fulfilled for a long time. He was also told in Daniel chapter 12 verse 4 that his vision involved the time of the end. The time of the end simply refers to the end of the Old Covenant age. As I've mentioned elsewhere, the Jews understood 2 times, 2 ages, the present age and the age to come. The time of the end is not referring to the end of the world as futurists would have us believe, but to the end of the Old Covenant age, a very significant event. So here in Revelation chapter 5, we're seeing the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy and of his last vision. We're going to take a look now at Daniel chapter 12 verses 1 to 9, where you'll hear mention of the same scroll that's mentioned in Revelation chapter 5. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase their knowledge. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood 2 others, one on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, "It will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed." I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked my Lord, what will be the outcome of all this? He replied, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled and sealed until the time of the end." Daniel 12:7 is an interesting verse. It says, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered or finally broken, all of these things shall be finished or completed. This occurred in AD 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. We see that Daniel's 70 weeks would be completely fulfilled when the power of the holy people being Israel, had finally broken. The old covenant was no more. In the words of David Chilton, the book, in other words the scroll, is nothing less than a testament of the resurrected and ascended Christ, the new covenant. This idea of covenant is central to the message of Revelation. As I've said before elsewhere, the whole of the Bible is the story of God's covenant journey with mankind. Chilton tells us that a scroll fastened with 7 seals would have been instantly recognised as a testament, in the same way as in Germany before the introduction of money orders. Everyone knew that a letter sealed with 5 seals contained money. So we have here a testament document that reveals the new covenant. This coming of the new covenant implies the passing of the old and the judgment of unbelieving Israel. In the scroll with 7 seals, we see the testament of the resurrected and ascended Christ. But we also see the sentence handed down against Jerusalem for its part in shedding all the righteous blood of the martyrs, as mentioned in Matthew 23, verse 35, and for the rejection of Christ by unbelieving Israel. You can check out my messages on Matthew 23 and 24 to find out more about this judgment that Jesus prophesied. The imagery of the document inscribed on both sides, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 5, verse 1, is also used by the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel tells of receiving a scroll containing a list of judgments against Israel. The message is the same as is seen in the scroll in Revelation. Judgment is coming upon the house of Israel. Ken Gentry, one of the greatest living scholars on this topic, he notes that the scroll is God's divorce certificate from the Old Covenant. So in this scroll we have the testament of the resurrected and ascended Christ. We have the sentence that was passed down against Jerusalem, and God's divorce certificate from the Old Covenant. Gentry says we see the scroll fully opened in Revelation 10, where it presents the inclusion of the Gentiles into God's kingdom. There just needs to be one worthy to execute this judgment. This scroll, this covenant document, like the stone tablets of the Old Covenant, is written on front and back. The question is, who is worthy to be the mediator of the new covenant? It seems that no one can fulfill the conditions required of the mediator of the new covenant. All previous mediators had ultimately proved inadequate for the task. John begins to weep greatly until one of the elders says that someone has been found worthy. Revelation 5:5, do not weep, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Jesus is worthy to open the sealed box. That means that the time of the end has arrived. And later John is told in Revelation chapter 10 verse 6 that there will be no more delay in the fulfillment of what the prophets, including Daniel, had foretold. John goes on to say in verse 6 of Revelation chapter 5, then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing in the centre of the throne, encircled by 4 living creatures and the elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He came and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, and they sang a new song. So here you have the appearance of one qualified to be mediator of this new covenant, Jesus Christ. His role as the sacrificed one explains his being likened to a lamb. It's not because he's gentle and lamb-like that he's referred to as a lamb, but because of his work, because of what he did, because of his sacrifice. He is the Lamb who was slain to take away the sins of the world. The language used here in this chapter of Revelation, standing as if slain, means continual, and it references back to the daily burnt offerings in the temple. The fact that he has 7 horns represents all power and strength. David Chilton tells us, in the same way the great sacrificial lamb to whom all other sacrifices pointed now provides In the same way, the great sacrificial lamb to whom all other sacrifices pointed now provides power and strength and victory for his people in their war for the dominion of the earth. He also notes that the 7 horns would also speak to the readers of judgment coming, as 7 ram's horns were used to herald the judgment of God on his enemies and the victory and salvation of the covenant people in the Battle of Jericho. So this is another reference here to the judgment that is coming. Chilton tells us that he has 7 eyes, which represents all knowledge and wisdom, and is a reference to back in Genesis as the Spirit hovered over the earth at creation, and we are told that God saw that his creation was good 7 times. In verses 7 to 10 of Revelation chapter 5, we're told that a new song is sung. The song that was sung in chapter 4 praises God for all his work in creating all things, whereas this new song praises God for the redemption we have in Christ. In Revelation 5 verse 10 it says, "You have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on earth." Unlike in the Old Covenant, in the New Covenant we are all kings and priests. The old has been done away with. We are now all kings and priests and will reign on earth. Our reigning is not a future event. It is our present tense reality. We get to reign on earth now. I like what N.T. Wright says. The Lamb is being praised not just for rescuing us, but for turning us from helpless rebels into useful servants, from sin slaves into a kingdom of priests. The Lamb has set us free to stop being spectators and to start being actors. Wow. The Lamb has set us free to stop being spectators and to start being actors. We are given the task that Adam forfeited. This time, however, we stand on an unshakable foundation, that of Jesus, of his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. We are a nation of kingly priests moving toward our destiny, which is to reign on earth. Chilton tells us that a new song was sung 7 times in the Old Testament, each time before a new stage in redemptive history. And here in Revelation chapter 5 we see a new song sung celebrating the making of a new covenant. In verses 11 to 14 we see the second song that's sung in this chapter. In the first he's declared worthy to take the scroll and open its 7 seals, that's in verse 9. But in the second, in verse 12, he is proclaimed worthy to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honour and glory and blessing. So, as being found worthy to take the scrolls and open the seals, Jesus is found worthy as mediator of the new covenant, and he's also worthy to receive his due as mediator of this covenant. Let me finish with a quote from David Chilton. The church in John's day was about to experience a time of severe testing and persecution. These Christians needed to understand history as something not ruled by chance or evil men, or even the devil, but ruled instead from God's throne by Jesus Christ. They needed to see that Christ was reigning now, and that he had already wrested the world from Satan's grasp, and that even now all things in heaven and earth were bound to acknowledge him as King. They needed to see themselves in the true light as kings and priests already, waging war and overcoming, predestined to victory. They needed the biblical perspective of history, that all history is moving inexorably toward the universal dominion of the Lord Jesus Christ, The new covenant has come. Behold, he is conquered. Thank you for joining me.